Well, hello there. I am Parker W. Stons, your host today on the Producers Podcast Takeover. That's right, I am taking control over today's episode because Micah Versemann, the man who usually occupies this chair, is sitting on the opposite side of the interview table to be our guest on this podcast. I am avenging Micah's many guests by putting Micah under his own cruel interrogation methods. So this should be interesting. Let's do this. So, I met Micah at the Christian Worldview Film Festival about 3-4 years ago.
Something like that.
Yeah. We met in a hotel lobby, spent much time talking about films and life. I usually make enemies, so it was strange that we became friends. I was wondering, what is wrong with this guy? Why doesn't he hate me? But no, long story short, we worked together on a short film. He is a writer, director, producer, filmmaker extraordinaire, and is the man behind the curtain at Brothers in Christ Productions. I did want to ask you, though, this is a non-filmmaking question. What made you want to start a podcast about producing and filmmaking? Tell me about this adventure.
Yeah, so this all came out of 2020, like so many people who started a podcast. And so during that time, I was deciding to lean more into the producer vein of things. But when there's not a lot of projects going on that you can get on to gain experience, and unlike DPing where you can just grab a camera and go shoot stuff and put a reel together, or watch the latest YouTube videos about the new camera models and lenses, there's not as much out there really for producers to just learn on their own. Mm-hmm. So I had a friend that's like, the best way to do that right now would be to start a podcast, and then you can ask the questions you have about producing while also networking and building relationships with other producers. And at first I didn't want to do it. Like, I think I sat on the idea for 2 to 3 months after he suggested it, and then finally I was like, okay, I'll give it a try and do 1 or 2 seasons, and we'll just see, is there even any interest out there for something like this? Because, I looked around and there wasn't anything just on producing when it came to film podcast. And then, fast forward to now, and here we are with season 3. The show keeps growing and everything, so it's exciting.
By the way, congratulations on a season 3.
Yeah.
It's
been a lot of work,
milestone.
A lot of learning, but it's exciting.
Most people don't even make it to a season 2. So,
well, I didn't
huge congratulations there.
I didn't have to convince any, networks to pick me back up, so that helps.
That's
a lot.
true. That is very true. There's a lot of freedom in that. You'll be able to go to, season 35. So, no one's going to shut you down. Okay, so so here's the big question, Micah. Why on earth would you get into something like producing? I have produced one short, currently producing another, and I hate it. So why on earth would you even get into it?
That is a really good question, of which the answer is nothing, I guess, special, you would put it. So for several years, I really wanted to pursue more the G&E side of filmmaking. But then at the same time, I was trying to get on, just some different short films and things like that, and a lot of the different roles on a film set, just to get that experience and understand better, like, how they would interact with the G&E department. So I had a friend call me up. He had written a script and was looking for somebody to help produce it, and I had never done just the role of the producer on a project before, so I was like, sure, I'll give it a try. It's a short film, so if I utterly hate it, it's not like a super big long-term commitment, and I never have to do it again. And so went into production on that, and somehow it ended up being like this, probably one of the smoothest run projects I've ever been on, from like all the different areas, camera, lighting, like, which I was not expecting, especially being a first time producer. But I think that helped me a lot because it didn't scare me off with 50 million things going wrong every day. And then on top of that, I had so many people on that project that were like, you did a really good job compared to other people we've worked with. Like, we think you could really do a good job at this. So that was kind of what initially lit the fire in terms of producing for me.
Well, kudos to you. I think you guys are crazy. You guys who love producing. I think you and I had talked about at one point. You were like, I think you posted on Facebook, like, I'm putting together a spreadsheet. This is so much fun. And I was like, are you crazy? Like, what on earth? So tell me about Brothers in Christ Productions. How did this get started, and what was the goal for this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Brothers in Christ, that was the name I came up with back when I first started making films, because for whatever reason, when I wanted to do like something that was more actually had a script instead of just random backyard stuff, ended up being like a Christian film instead of some like James Bond or action movie. And at the time, I had my best friend that was helping write it and kind of act in it and stuff. And so we were like, what better name than Brothers in Christ Productions, And so that's kind of where it all started. And then obviously as time's gone on, my friend's no longer involved with the filmmaking and that, but it's just kind of stuck around as, I wouldn't call it a hobby, but it's kind of almost like a side gig for me, where it's not like my money maker, and the goal is more just to produce content that uplifts and strengthens the church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have to ask a question that every filmmaker gets asked at some point during their life. Oh, Micah, I'm sure you have some. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're a perfect person. What bad filmmaking skeletons are in your closet? Are there any horrible films that you would not want anyone watching? Like, they're just tucked away and you hope you've burned the last copy, and, tell us about one.
Yeah, so actually, like, the first couple, that is what started Brothers in Christ, are probably my main, like, skeleton films. They actually are, like, technically on YouTube, but they're hidden from the public.
Why would you do that? Why would you put them on YouTube?
I did it.
Okay, so we can. How can we find these, Micah?
Unfortunately, you can't. They're hidden so that only people with a link have them.
I see,
And I did that so that the people that were a part of it, if they ever wanted to go back and relive our childhood adventures, they would have that link in an email to view it. But otherwise, beyond those, I think the main other one is, there's one other short film I did that I think it could have gone somewhere if I would have spent more time developing the story, and I just didn't. But I ended up having my sister write an original song for like the credits of the film. And it went along with the footage we had so well that I went and like re-edited it into a music video. So the music video is out there for people to see, but the actual short film I've hidden as well, because it's just, not worth it.
That is smart. So you just basically took like the best things about that short film and just like put it into basically a music video.
Yep. And
that's smart. It's
really smart. If you go to our Brothers in Christ YouTube channel, you can still find it, and in fact, somehow it is still the number one video on there. Like, it's consistently getting views every month, and I don't do anything with it, and I'm like, I don't understand how that works.
Why this one?
Yep. Like, there's way better quality stuff and stuff I'm promoting on there, but that's what gets the views.
Yeah. It happens that way. That's pretty cool. No, that's like why we love demo reels so much, right? It's like you can just put all the best stuff into one clip or one video, and people don't have to watch the entire movie and see all the mistakes that you made. They just get to see the best parts.
Yeah.
So, tell me, is there a an aspect of producing that very few people know about in terms of producing? You know, people know a lot about what a producer does, especially those of us in the industry. But what is something that, you know, I won't even know what a producer does? Because basically, we view you guys as just, you know, sitting behind a desk, your feet propped up, and, you know, saying no to, you know, buying equipment that we need, and but it's a little bit more than that, right?
Yeah, no, that's good. I don't know if there's like one solid answer just because it can so much depend on the scale of your project. You know, like a lot of the smaller things I've been a part of so far, like writing all the checks to pay people at the end of the week or the end of the shoot falls to me.
Yes.
But you know, when you get up to those Marvel films or whatever, they're hiring accountants. You know, that is all they
Yes.
do. So a lot of it does depend on that. I guess probably the main thing, especially for a lot of independents and beginners, is just all of the paperwork that goes along. Like I just finished reading a book that's all about copyrights and clearances and going over, like, if you're going, you know, trying to make a big feature film for theatrical distribution and all this, like all the forms you have to have saying you own the rights to the script and the music and like all these things a lot of people just assume are part of having like the copyright to the actual film, but you have to be able to prove.
Do you enjoy the research aspect and just kind of the mundane things that you have to do as producer? You know, putting together a spreadsheet and calling people and, you know, begging people for locations, things like that.
I do and I don't. I'm still. I think the calling people, that just takes a lot of time to get used to,
Yeah.
unless that's your personality. Like, I'm way better now than I was a year ago on being able to randomly call somebody up and explain what we're doing, what we need, and try and get permission. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy the past couple months. I've really started getting and learning more of like all the different formulas and that you can plug into spreadsheets so that it's, you know, adding or subtracting or doing whatever just on its own instead of me having to do it on a calculator or whatever. So I do enjoy a lot of that. Plus, you know, it's something you can be listening to music or a podcast or whatever while you're doing, unlike video editing where you have to be focused on what's being said or editing to a music track or whatever.
Well, speaking of spreadsheets and budgets and all that great stuff, as a producer, you do have to oftentimes come up with a budget. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me, you know, how hard is it when department heads are asking you for more money, you know, for equipment, or they're just, you know, quoting you how much it's going to be for, you know, the department to get the job done for the film? How do you portion out, you know, what money goes to what?
It's a really hard question, I feel, and something just it's always hard to deal with because of the fact that you could always have more money. Like it's not like other aspects of film where, you know, there's that cutoff date of when the distributor needs it, or, you know, when you have to wrap for the day because of labor laws and things like that. You could always push the budget higher if the funds are there to allow. So for me, like, some of it obviously has just come, I've been doing this long enough now that I just kind of have somewhat of an idea of what some things cost. I've done a number of short films that of different sizes and that. So like when it comes to budgeting for insurance and that, I have a rough idea based on, the length of the script, the number of people involved, what all happens in the film, of like where that insurance quote might be falling and that. And then otherwise it can be, like a lot of research, like looking up, are there film permits that you got to get, for a specific city, and what do those cost, or even just talking with department heads as you get them on, of like, this is what we're thinking for budget, like what are your thoughts having read the script? All kind of feeds in, ultimately it's always that combination of what would be awesome and what's realistic. Because the budget to do something awesome isn't always the most realistic budget, either for the scope of your project or because of your experience level. Nobody's going to trust you with $100 million yet, because you haven't even made anything for 100,000,
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of lost track of where I was going.
It's all right. It's all still good stuff. Good stuff. No, speaking of, just like producers' duties and everything, producers are usually heavily involved in putting together a crew. So talk to me, about that. What are the discussions you and the director have about putting that together? How hard is it to put together, a group of people to go out and make the best film that you possibly can make?
Yeah, no, it definitely can be a challenge. And this is something I'm still learning. Like on the project I'm working on right now, it's the first time that we've done like actual Zoom calls between me, the director, and like whichever department head prior to them even signing on to the film. A lot of times prior to this project, it was either just an email with the information, or maybe just me calling them on the phone and talking things through and then signing them on. But I think a lot of it for the producer, one, comes down to spending the time first with the director, so that you can kind of understand, one, what they're looking for in the project, and also what what their personality is, their work style, maybe you could say, would be a way to describe it, because not everybody's going to mesh with everybody because of the way personalities are, or you're not putting a super experienced gaffer with somebody that it's their first time working G&E, because that's not always gonna work out the best.
It's not. Yikes.
Not always. Depends on the project, depends on the person.
Right.
And so for me, at least, I've found a lot of that ultimately goes back to, as a producer, just networking. Like in the past year, especially with things being slower at times, I've spent a lot of time on the phone or Zoom calls with filmmakers that aren't producers, just learning more about what they do, about them as a person and everything, and building my network there, so that I have this net that when it comes to building a team, I kind of know who works well together, also where they're based at in the country, so that I can hopefully bring together more local teams instead of flying the whole crew.
Which can get really expensive.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. That is the truth. But yeah, just networking and knowing the people, I think, are the biggest two things. And even like paying attention to what films they've done, because you can usually see who they all worked with, when you watch the credits, and then you can, talk to other people to find out, like, did these people work well together? Like, would you bring them both back on to be camera department again, or not really, and things like that.
Right. Correct. And how hard is it for you to network? I mean, I've seen you kind of walk the crowds, I've seen you kind of mingle, and it seems very easy for you. But for other people, having to produce and everything, it's hard to just kind of, go up to people and start talking. And sometimes it feels forced, sometimes it feels like you're only getting to know them because you want them to work on a project. But for you, it's a little bit more personal than that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I definitely, I guess the way you've seen me network, that's not how I started back in the day. I remember my first film festival that I went to when I was getting started. Like, I was one of those people that would spend maybe 5 minutes talking with a person with the end goal of being to get their business card and give them mine. And
We've all done that.
Yep. And that a lot of times be the only time I would see that person at the festival, and big shock. I never, really got hired or worked with any of those people,
Right.
It was always the one or two that I ended up, continuing to bump into because we went to the same session or film showing, that ended up, bringing the work. And so it's something obviously over the years I've got better at, and I've kind of learned what my goals are with networking. I think that's a big thing. If you don't know specifically what you're looking to get out of networking, you're not going to do a very good job at it. At the same time, though, I do still relate about, the struggles of, especially when I'm trying to network with somebody that's farther along in my career than me, of like, how do you go up and start a conversation, when you're not on the same level as them, when it's peers, it's super easy, or even if it's somebody a little bit farther ahead of me, but like we've worked on a project together, that's still pretty easy. So a lot of times for me, if anything, I try to have, a question or two that I specifically want to ask them to at least break the ice. And then that way they can usually see from those questions, like kind of where my experience is, how serious am I and everything. And hopefully from there, then the conversation just keeps going.
Yeah. No, it's very difficult for, all of us, any of us, to go up to somebody and just start a conversation, especially those who are, on a higher level than us. That's why when, I met you, Micah, it's like I was starstruck. I was looking up at you and I was like, what? You made more than one film? So like already you were like a higher level than I was. And so, but I was when I was producing my short film, I called a producer friend of mine on the phone, Matthew Jordan, who produced Counter Column, and I called him and I was like, Matthew Jordan, help! It was like I just needed advice on producing because I was way in over my head, and one of the things he told me was that as a producer, you basically have to do everything. He or she must be able to plug in wherever there's a hole, run errands, find locations, Hollywood a light, and most importantly, has to take care of the cast and crew. That was the most important thing that kind of stuck out to me. And it's interesting that I bring this up now because recently you put up some quotes from some of your guests, and Matthew Jordan, there was that quote of, you have to take care of that cast and crew. And so, I just kind of found all those things to be such a high responsibility and a daunting task. But is this pretty accurate of what a producer must do?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty accurate. Obviously, the more you get into like actual like working in Hollywood, union stuff and everything, you're not going to be necessarily Hollywooding a light or some of those aspects anymore because the unions have laws and rules against doing stuff like that.
Right.
But yeah, otherwise it very much is. And usually I've found you can tell the sets that were well produced are the ones where they're taking care of their cast and crew, and jumping in. And the ones that, people are frustrated, sleep deprived, whatever, usually those are the types of things that are lacking from the set and the producer.
What are some mistakes that you learned from that have made you grow as a producer and just as a filmmaker in general?
Mm-hmm. That's good. I think, and this one to some degree almost is a little bit more of like a director mistake that I made on one of my shorts, but it still can apply to producer. But especially myself, and then what I see a lot of beginning filmmakers do is when they start making that jump from doing it all themselves to we want an actual G&E team, we want an art department and all this, they forget to take into account how much more time that adds, because you're trying to get to that next level of quality. And so one of my early shorts, when I was first doing that, I didn't take that into account. And I think we ended up, the department heads came to me and they were like, there's no way we can get all the shots you want. And I think we ended up having to cut about 30 to 40 shots, from the film.
Yeah.
And I had to, go through and figure out, which ones to get rid of, and then how to make sure if that was specifically capturing one thing uniquely, like how are we going to get that
right
somewhere else. So definitely just having that sense of how much time it takes, which obviously you're always learning and growing as you get to bigger sets and things, can take more time. But that was a big one. And then I think another one would probably be with some of my earlier stuff not really having any type of marketing plan, which obviously even since my first couple of shorts, the whole digital realm and how you distribute has changed so much that it's hard to really compare in some ways. But the sooner you start thinking about a marketing plan and the types of content you're gonna create and you want to have available leading up to its initial release, and then after the release, because there's a lot of people that go and they have some great content to promote its premiere on YouTube or its release on Amazon, and then there's nothing, and you're not going to grow your audience that way unless you have a very active audience that's sharing themselves and causing the film to get pushed on the platforms.
That's a very good point, because most of us filmmakers we oftentimes are just like, okay, we're gonna make a movie and everyone's going to see it, and it's this wrong way of thinking that just because you make a movie, the rest of it will come in some way or another. So explain to us how important, I mean, you just kind of did, but what are some of the ways that you approach marketing in terms of planning ahead, and what maybe talk to us about one of your films that you've recently done, where what was your strategy in terms of marketing and getting it in front of as many eyes as possible?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, it's kind of hard to talk about any specific film of mine because the last two released last year with COVID, and so
COVID year doesn't count.
They're like count. The initial plans we had for those pretty much got chucked out the window and changed around. But then you go back farther, like the ones before that, I learned so much from that one that I had plan to apply to, I guess, what you could call the COVID films. So there's a number of things I haven't really, I guess you could say, gotten to test out. Like, I had some cool ideas, but I don't know if they would have actually have worked because of COVID.
Is that something that is just part of producing, is testing out stuff? You know, like one marketing strategy may be different, you know, for one film than for another, you know? Is it just kind of constantly reinventing the wheel, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, I mean, just in general as a producer, testing things out, finding out what works, you know, either just for you. It might be something that only works for you, and, you know, the next producer that tries it, it doesn't work for them. I mean, a lot of it, when you're talking about marketing a film, really comes down to knowing your audience, which I think, especially on the independent side in general, but especially if you're getting into like the independent Christian side, I think is a downfall of a lot. I think a lot of those filmmakers just assume, I'm making a Christian film, Christians are going to flock to see it, and that is not true. You really have to know who your audience is, you know, in terms of not only, you know, their age or their gender, depending on, you know, what the story in the film is about, but even, you know, what are they passionate about?
Right. So this question, I'm really interested in getting your take on this. There's this ongoing debate about short films, whether to make them or not. Most agree that you should at least make one, but the debate is usually about how many you should make before jumping to a feature, and how much you should spend on these shorts, because some of these shorts are made on micro budgets. Some of them are like insane amounts that you could almost probably, you know, shoot a cheap short feature film, you know, using that budget that some of these shorts will, you know, how much money they spent. But so especially since we all know there isn't really a market for short films, they rarely make a profit. You're lucky if you break even. Just, you know, what are your thoughts on short films in general, like as a producer?
Yeah, that's a good question, because so far, like, most of what I've done has been short films, and like, honestly, myself right now, I'm not really interested in producing any features. So I think some of it in the value of doing short films depends on what you're wanting to do, like the way your film career is going. You know, a part of me is like, I would agree, I think at least one short film is helpful to do, but I would caveat that by saying, when I say short film, I'm talking about one where, like, you're either just the producer or the director or both, and you have, you know, a DP, you have somebody doing art, you have somebody doing lighting, so that
right. It's not just you.
Yeah,
doing
you
a
want
film.
You want it structured more like a normal film set, and hopefully with people that have some of that training and experience. Beyond that, I think it really depends on where you're wanting to go. You know, I know some people that have made short films that are more like the 25-minute length, and they're now using them to pitch, you know, a TV series or, you know, something like that. And they're treating it more as a pilot for something down the road. You know, again, I've seen a number of, you know, ministry organizations and that make really high quality short films that they're specifically using, you know, either with a specific curriculum or conference. So I definitely think short films can be helpful, and I think there is a place for them. Unfortunately, I think most people want to treat them the exact same as a feature film and expect the exact same return and results, and that's where a lot of the problem comes in.
Yeah, for sure. Another hot topic is I don't know if you've come across this, Micah. I certainly have, but a hot topic is when or how often one should lean heavily on a volunteer cast and crew. Most agree that for your first project, it is mostly acceptable to ask for people to work for free. And there's right. Sometimes there's benefits. It's almost kind of a currency in a way. It's that you can come work on my film and you get a credit. You are able to shine in whatever department you're doing. But that it's a fine line between needing help and taking advantage of your fellow filmmakers, especially in an industry that often pays very little. So, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, it's a good debate, and an important one to have, because I've definitely been on both sides of it where I'm working on projects and wishing either I was getting paid or getting paid more. And then at the same time on the other end where it's like I'm trying to keep this a reasonable budget, and how do you do, we can't really pay people more or anything and keep the budget, where we can either get it funded or whatever. So for me, a lot of it will come down to one, the experience of the crew and that I'm like reaching out to, and then also what the story of the film calls for. There are definitely times where, if it's your everyday, drama that's set in, maybe one or two locations, and it's like a house and, and a street or something like that, it's probably going to be easier for you to achieve that with maybe people that don't have quite as much experience, and they're willing to either work at a reduced rate or for volunteer, to get that experience and make those connections. But if it's, this big, sci-fi genre project where there's all these props you got to create and all that, that's probably not the right project to be doing for free. Now, you never know. You might get those people that are just like, crazy excited about it, or they haven't gotten to work in that genre before, and they're willing to volunteer. Again, too,
Sure.
I would also say some of it comes back to the networking and the relationships, and knowing, who, having a better feeling for like who it might be okay to ask to work at a reduced rate or for volunteer. Because I know some people that would they're not going to just say no to the project if I send them an email. They're going to, read the script and want to find out more before they'd make a decision. And I know other people that if you're not paying them their full rate, they're just not working with you, which I've been in both positions, so I totally get that too. You got to pay the bills.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's it. I don't think there's one exact answer to it other than, knowing what you're trying to accomplish with your film.
Yeah. Good stuff. So let's get back a little bit more into you, Micah. Some personal questions. Are you choosy about what projects you want to work on? Does one project excite you more than maybe another one? And if so, which ones are you more drawn to?
Yeah, I would say I'm somewhat choosy in two senses. One, I've done enough projects that there are certain people that I just really like working with. And so it's kind of with it to the point where with some of them, if they reach out for anything, like as long as I'm not booked on another project, I'm most likely going to work on it, just because I love working with them, and usually the people they bring on besides myself are great. It's just a really great experience and cool projects. So that's one way I'm kind of picky. And then I do to a degree get into, I like reading the script, especially as a producer, and seeing kind of how this, how the script resonates with me. That's a big one, because as a producer, like, you have to be invested in the story, because if not, you're gonna hate producing that project. And then for me too, at times I'm also looking at, how is this maybe going to be helpful in my career? So right now I'm working on a project that's in a genre I've never done before. And so while it maybe...
What genre is it?
Medieval fantasy.
Ah,
so
sweet.
Yeah, so like it's, to some degree it's like at the time I wasn't necessarily looking for a new project of the size and scope to do, but I really liked the script, and then on top of it, the aspect of it giving me something new that will stand out when I'm sharing about it on social media, if I put stuff on my website about it, and just getting that experience was really valuable.
Right. So this is something that I've had a hard time with, and I was wondering if you had kind of the same trouble as I do. Entrusting a project into the hands of someone else. As a producer, you're not the director. Sometimes you are, but in many instances, you're just producing. There's someone else in charge in terms of directing and getting this project, directing the actors and the action. How hard is it to just kind of step back and watch as someone else carries out your vision, and and even if, like, as you're watching, it doesn't end up looking anything like what you had imagined? How hard is it to just completely trust someone else to, for your project?
I think it kind of varies as a producer. To me at least, if you've done your job and your diligence when you're working on casting the film, when you're working on crewing the film, then you should be able to step back, because you have complete trust in the director and his vision, and that the people around him will be able to bring that vision to life. And if you don't, then to me that that would either tell me that you either didn't do a good enough job in your casting or crewing process, and that's why you're kind of worried because you don't trust them because of something, or that it might be more of a you could say, like, micromanaging type thing with you, which I've known some producers that do struggle with that. That's part of their personality, and you have to work with that, to again be able to trust your team to do their job, and not be hovering over their shoulder the entire time.
Right.
Honestly, for me, I like it. It's like I like putting that team together to where I can literally, step back and just watch everything happen, and watch the scene come to life on the monitor, or talk to, G&E while they're filming, because there's nothing, lighting that needs to be tweaked or fixed while they're rolling.
Right. It's very freeing, right? As just to be able to just let that go. I have to ask, like, what is your secret? How do you stay sane as a producer during all those times that, problems arise during production? Like, what's the secret?
That's a good question.
Is it fruit snacks?
I'll give you two answers, a funny one and then a more serious one. So I would say the funny one is I don't drink coffee. So, I'm not dealing with that.
Shots fired. Shots fired to all those caffeinated people out there. Yeah,
I don't have all that.
You just lost like half your audience, probably. Maybe 75% of it.
I don't have that caffeine or all of that stuff running through me. So that's my funny answer. I always pick on filmmakers about. I think for me personally, I've just had in my life, a lot of things I've done have kind of trained me in a way to be able to deal with high stress situations or adrenaline and all that better and manage it and focus. So that helps me stay sane. And then kind of in tandem with that, there's just been a number of times, where crazy things have happened in my life that are completely beyond my control.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to figure out a way to make it work, and deal with it and not let it distract me too much from getting everything else done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think those couple of things together have really led to me being in some ways a little unique in that perspective.
I would definitely type you as a unique person. You're definitely that type. No, so I don't want to go too in depth about this because it's been talked about before, but I do want you to touch briefly on financing. I know you've talked to other producers about this on your podcast, and I would encourage listeners to go and look for those episodes. I believe you talked extensively on this topic to the great Micah Gerber, good friend of us both, and an all-around great dude. But tell us your perspective on financing.
I would say, part of it is just being able to not get discouraged. Funding is, I find, the longest and usually hardest part of any filmmaking venture. And, just like any other part of filmmaking, you're going to usually run into 10 people that say no before you get that one that says yes. And so remembering that, and that it's not, always going to be that first person, even if you've done the research, or you have that relationship with that person, they just might be like, no, this isn't a right project for us. And so keeping that in mind is always important so that you don't get discouraged. And beyond that, a lot of it, I keep saying it, but whether it's film or any other business, it's really, I think, the biggest thing, which is networking and relationships, is what it comes back to. If you're that person that locks themselves in their house or apartment 24/7, you're not going to have that network to successfully find funding or financing,
Right.
because nobody really knows who you actually are. And the majority of the places that I've ended up getting funding from are either people or groups that know me personally, or there's some connection here, whether it's somebody that I know introduced me to them, or something like that. And so none of that would happen if I'm not out there, whether it's with a business networking group, whether it's at, my church, the karate club I'm a part of, all these different circles that I get to meet and talk to different people, especially people outside of film, because I think that's a big part of it. Is so many people, the majority of the people they hang out with are, film people, but generally they're not going to have the money to donate to your film because they're raising it for their own film.
Right.
It's the people outside of film that are more who you want to network with, because they have more open doors and a different audience that you can reach.
Right. It's all about the relationships. Go figure.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you ever consider co-producing, and maybe you already have, but co-producing with someone? And what, for some of us, what does that usually look like when you're co-producing with someone? How do you divvy up the workload?
So I've never co-produced a project where I'm just a producer. on it, so I don't really have much I can speak to on in that regards. I've co-produced before on projects that I've been also directing, and that was so that during the actual production I wouldn't have to worry about any of the producer aspects. I had that other producer that can make the phone calls, write the checks, troubleshoot any problems that come up. But then also to have somebody that has to okay the bigger producer decisions besides myself, since I'm also dealing with the emotions a director feels. Because I've seen the projects where the director is the sole producer, and those can sometimes be rough productions because the decisions are being made based on more what the director wants and not with the mindset from the producer's point of view, or vice versa, and then it just goes downhill from there.
Micah, was there anyone who had kind of been somewhat of a mentor to you as a filmmaker, someone who greatly influenced you in this field of producing or even just filmmaking in general?
The easy answer for that would be to say it was Motion University. That I would, even though that's obviously not a person but a group, that mentored me. Like, I still work a lot with the teachers and the staff on that. A lot of the people I brought on to projects are also alumni of the course. So that would be like the biggest group, I guess I would say, that's kind of like taught or mentored me at this point.
Mm-hmm. And Motion University, which is run by the Bartletts, again, Andrew and Hannah, and John Clay Burnett. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Great bunch of people right there.
And final question, Micah, before we let you go. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to another producer or filmmaker out there that you think is very important, knowing this, but is not taught enough?
I guess what I'd say, and I've kind of touched on it here and there throughout the talk. I'll say it. I guess this is a different way of saying it that I've kind of thought over for a while. But to be a good producer, you really first have to learn how to be a good steward. Both in the sense of, how you're taking care of your cast, your crew, dealing with the money for a project and the different, assets, props, things like that. But also, when you get into more the spiritual sense of being a good steward of the overall project, that you realize God has given to you, and that really changes how you view the whole thing and different decisions you're going to make through the process when you look through that lens.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, Micah, thank you so much for all this wonderful insight, and we really appreciate your time today. And, good luck going forward, especially on this podcast. Again, amazing job getting to season 3. And so thanks for being a guest, being willing to, answer my interrogating questions. So we appreciate your time and look forward to the next episode.